What's up guys, welcome back to another colour guide. The model we're going to be looking at today is this Deathjester. It's one of the character models from an ongoing Eldar commission I've been working on. I tried to give him quite a sinister feel and I was quite happy with the result because he actually ended up looking like some kind of super villain from a Spider-Man film. I used a Ben Comet's recipe for the gold parts. To do this you want to start off with black. And then for your initial base colour, you're going to use a mix of Vallejo Japanese uniform and black. And then you're going to switch up to pure Japanese uniform for your initial highlight. It's important when you're doing non-metallics that your highlights follow the shape of the surface that you're working on, and also that you use a consistent light source. So here I'm essentially using a single point of light which is shining from the top down. So because these areas here are curved, the light is going to be quite central. The highlights were intensified by adding Vallejo Ivory to the Japanese uniform, and this was built up to pure ivory before finally applying a pure white reflex. A subtle glaze of Rhinox hide was applied to increase the contrast and also give some colour variation. The diamond pattern was created by first sketching a grid with Celestra Grey. This was done quite simply by painting diagonal lines in one direction and then doing the exact same thing in the opposite direction. So once the grid was finished, the boxes were then filled in with Celestra Grey. It's a little bit awkward once you get under the leg in this model. There's not much room to manoeuvre the brush, so you'll just need to bite the bullet and do your best here. A subtle highlight was then applied by adding some white into the grey, and these were drawn up towards the top of the thigh. The gun was then based in black, and initial highlights were blocked in with Caspian blue, and these were blended by glazing with Caspian blue into the highlight. Then a second highlight was added with Bering blue this time, and this was applied in the same manner by blocking in the colour and then glazing over the transition towards the highlight. More highlights were then added by mixing in some white into the Bering blue, and these were painted on as thin lines and edge highlights. Final reflex highlights were made with pure white. I tried to apply these randomly over the darkest areas in order to simulate a sparkle effect. Occasionally I painted a small cross to give the illusion of a light flare. The purple cloth was based in black leather. This is a very dark desaturated purple. This was then highlighted with sunset purple, and further highlights were made by mixing in some Vallejo ivory into the sunset purple. The gemstones were done in the same way, but extra ivory was added in order to give more contrast. For the black parts, I simply based in black and then I highlighted with Abyssal blue. You can get the same sort of colour by adding some bright blue to your black. When I'm highlighting black, I try and make sure that most of the surface is left black, so the highlights only cover a very small section. Progressively more white was added to the Abyssal blue, and this was used to apply successively smaller, sharp highlights. The cloak was done in a similar way. The only real difference was that I didn't go as high with the highlights as I wanted to retain a fabric appearance. A simple freehand was then applied using the same colours for the gold. The skull was based in black, and then this was highlighted with a mix of Boreal tree green and a little bit of black leather. In order to maximise the contrast, this was applied not as a base colour, but as an initial highlight, painting it on thinly to allow some of the black to show through in the darkest areas. I then started to stipple on Boreal tree green, creating a circular highlight near the top of the skull. If you've never tried stippling before, essentially all you're doing is letting the very tip of the brush hit the surface, leaving a very small dot. And this is done repeatedly, allowing the dots to become more opaque the closer you get to where you want your highlight. Highlights were then built up in the same manner by adding progressive amounts of sol yellow to the green. For the last few highlights, white was added to the mix before finally ending on a single sharp white highlight. A couple bright highlights were added randomly into the darker area of the skull, just to help give a more realistic sparkly finish. The bone breastplate was P3 rucksack tan with a little bit of black, and then highlights were simply layered up by adding more and more white to the mix. And then a final quick glaze of Rhinox hide was added just below the gem here at the top. The base was done in the same manner as shown in the last video. The only real difference was that the marble cracks were made by adding Rhinox hide to the base colour instead of Sunset Purple. The colour change on the arch was achieved by wet blending between black leather and Boreal tree green. So the black leather was applied here on the lower half, then the green was placed on the upper half, and while the paint was still wet, they were both blended together by drawing the green paint into the purple with a back and forth brush motion, thus creating a transition between the two colours. Alright guys, I think that's all from me. I'll be doing another colour guide video for the Blood Bowl Ogre that I uploaded a few days ago. I'll also be continuing the blending series, so be sure to keep an eye out for them. As always, thanks for watching, be sure to like and share the video and hit subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks again, bye for now.